Hello everybody, it is Professor Parish, and I hope that your week one has been fantastic, that you're getting settled in, that you've got your classes all figured out, you've got your schedule ready, everything's good to go, because we are jumping in to week two. We are diving into short stories. It's going to be a lot of fun. We've got some chapters to go over. It's going to be a good time. So, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping first, but settle in. Grab yourself a mug of coffee or decaf or hot cocoa, whatever floats your boat, and settle in as we start our grand adventure into our first unit, short stories. Alright, so I'm going to minimize myself here, put myself down in the corner. Here I am. So, I have put my page here into what we call student view, so that I see basically everything as you would see it, because as an instructor I get a few more perks and extra features that I see on this page, but now I am seeing it like you all do. So if you've not watched the introduction video, it's right here under announcements. Make sure to check that out. It's about half an hour long, and then the future lecture videos will be in this announcements section as well. I would highly encourage you all, please make sure to watch the lecture video each week. Just find time, listen to it while you're driving on your way to work, play it while you're at work, you know, don't get in trouble at work, play it at home, whatever you need to do, because I do go over quite a lot in these videos, and I typically find that when students email me questions, a lot of those questions have been answered in these videos. So that's my goal with this, is to hopefully give you all some answers to questions and to go over things for our class. So going to course content, looking at our assignments for this week. I'm recording this Sunday night, so if you've not submitted the grammar sampler or finished the discussion forum, please do so tonight. Due this week is going to be a couple of things. So we're going to talk about paper 1 at the end of this video. We're going to talk about it. Reading response 1, we're also going to talk about it at the end of this video. And then our discussion forum we're going to talk about. So I'm going to save these for last to kind of go over. They're pretty straightforward, but I want to talk about them. If you have questions about the Dropbox, so I understand that you did have to upload to the Dropbox your grammar sampler. All you do in that case, I'm going to use the grammar sampler as an example. All you do is just click on the link, go to upload file. If there's any file you need to read, it's going to be under this files link. You just upload file, pick choose file. It's going to open up a brand new window. Now this is not your computer. What MySIC does is it actually saves all of your assignments throughout the semester, which is kind of nice. You can always go back and pull these up at any time without having to be on your own computer, which is very handy if you need it. So what you'll need to do is click this upload button over here in the corner, and the upload button will let you choose from your computer. Okay, so I can choose, you know, this grammar sampler. I can open it up. Once it's done uploading, it'll say 100% insert. I do that. I can label it if I want, but otherwise I'm going to add file, and once I add file, it's going to ask if I'm done. And you can always click on this link again to check the file. I would highly encourage you doing that. I know I've had a few students already that uploaded a blank file on accident. Make sure to label your files, and make sure that once you upload them, go ahead and click on them again and make sure it's the right one. If it's not the right file, that's okay. Just make sure to email me as soon as this happens, and I will open the Dropbox back up for you. Now obviously the only exception is if you're uploading at like 11:55 p.m. and then you're like, oh no, I uploaded the wrong one. I'm going to tell you, it's too late. So make sure that you upload with plenty of time to check that. But if you're done, you can just click the finish button there, and then you can go back here to your assignments, and I'll show you, it's going to show a check mark when your assignments are completed. So for week 1, now it's showing I have a little check mark by my grammar sampler and I'm awaiting a grade. That means that that assignment is done. If you don't see a check mark, that means you've not completed the assignment. Alright, so I'm going to go over these three at the end of the video, so just stay tuned for that. But first, I want to start talking about short stories, and that is going to be in our resources and handouts. If you got a chance to look here this last week, you'll notice that we have the same presentation for both weeks 1 and week 2. This is the presentation I'm going to go over in this video today. The guidelines for paper 1 I'm going to examine as well, along with our paper 1 example. I will get back to those, I promise. If you've not read the syllabus, please do so. This MLA presentation I put here always at the beginning of the semester because I want it to be easy for you to find. Luckily, spoilers for our paper 1 guidelines, you will not need MLA for this first paper. Yay! So you're getting a little bit of a reprieve. You're getting a little bit of a break from MLA this first go around. Savor it, because we will be diving into MLA and all of its beautifulness very soon. But you won't have to worry about it for paper 1, but I do include the presentation up there just in case if you need it. And so to make it easy to find. So no, we're going to look at chapters 1 through 4, the PowerPoint, and that is what we're going over today. So I'm going to move myself over here. All right, so this textbook, 2 things about it. Actually 3. Thing 1, it is obnoxiously big. I realize that, and it has been a comment many students have made. So apologies, this thing could be used for self-defense. It's big, but also, number 2, I really like it. This textbook is old, and we've talked about this in the English department. It's almost 20 years old, which mind-blowing. But it has a lot of really good examples in it. There are so many, there are probably 5 or 6 plays in this textbook. There's so much poetry, there are so many short story examples. It's just a really good textbook, and eventually we're going to have to retire it, and I'm dreading that day because I really love this book. And I'll probably still borrow from it because I like it a lot. But finally, most of the text in this gigantic, obnoxiously large textbook are example stories. So no, we are not reading this whole entire textbook. That would be insane. I'm not that much of a monster. But we are going to pull a lot of terminology from this book. So if you noticed in the course content where I said read pages this to this, like 30 to 40 or 80 to 87, I'm picking out the textbook pages with terminology on them to help you kind of navigate and figure that out. You are welcome to read as many of the short stories as you want as examples, but you're not required to read them for this class. So let's just dive right in here. So chapter 1 starts out with the preview chapter and how we should interact with prose or short stories. I don't say fiction, I don't say nonfiction here, because prose and short stories kind of encompass both. It can be a real story or one that's made up. The main thing our textbook tells us to do is 1, read with an open mind. There's going to be a lot of text in this book that is unfamiliar to you and deals with unfamiliar circumstances. So reading with an open mind will just allow you to absorb the story the best. This second one here is the hardest. Oh, let me go back. Read a story more than once. We live in quite a fast-paced society, and it only gets faster, it seems. And so reading a story more than once can be very hard and difficult, and I understand the struggle myself. So to combat this, my solution would be to do a more close reading and read everything very intentionally and methodically than trying to read it more than once, because that can be tedious and we may not have time to do it. And I have younger cousins, so I have to use your imagination. Do the SpongeBob rainbow imagination. Just use your imagination when you read. Obviously, you're going to make up worlds and envision different actors playing the parts of these characters as you read, or at least I do. So you have to be imaginative to make the story engaging. Allow your emotions to come into play. It's okay to be affected by a story, and I will tell you as we go on with these chapters, there have been many stories that have affected me, both positively and negatively, and that's okay. Try to get a sense of the story as a whole. It can be easy for us to dismiss a story after the first 20 pages and go, oh, the story's going to be so boring, and then come to find out other people tell you, oh no, after you get to page 30 or something, it gets really good, and you're like, oh, I should have read more. Think about your reactions. What do they say about you as a person? What do they say about how you view text? And then talk with other readers. This last one's easy because we are stuck in a class together, so we have to talk about the readings. So that one's done for us. Yay. There are 7 elements, and I know I put fiction up here, even though I just said we weren't going to use that word. 7 elements of fiction, nonfiction, short story, prose, what have you. There are 7 elements. There is setting, which is not only where are we, but also when are we, and I really like that. It's not only the place, but it's the time period. So setting, character, who's involved, plot, what happens, point of view, who is telling the story, 5, symbolism, does the story have any extra meaning, 6, the theme, what does the story mean, what's its purpose, and finally, style, how does the author use language and set up the story. Those are our 7 elements of fiction. And prose and nonfiction. If you want a story to be successful, it has to contain all 7 of these elements. They can be to different extents, which we'll talk about, but a good story has all 7 elements present. Without an element, it's incomplete. So, the first chapter talks about setting and character. The overview of these 2 elements, one, they talk about narrating. And the narrator is just the person telling the story, and we'll go over narrator here again shortly. Dialogue is a verbal exchange between characters. When I was actually in a grad poetry class, our instructor gave us an assignment, and the assignment was for us to understand how dialogue works. And so their assignment was for us to go to the local coffee shop that was right across campus, and we had to sit in there and eavesdrop on a conversation. It was extremely awkward. It's so weird when you're sitting in a coffee shop by yourself with a little notepad writing down what people next to you are talking about. It feels weird and kind of like you're invading their space. But it was also incredibly effective because we don't talk in public like many authors write character speaking in dialogue. I think Stephen King is probably one of the more notorious authors who, if you ever read Stephen King dialogue, it doesn't quite sound like people actually talk. It's much more flowery and flourished and sophisticated. A lot of people, you know, when you see somebody, you're like, hey, how are you? Good. You? Oh, good. And that's the conversation. It's not like, well, today on this fine morning, I happened to be on my way to the cafeteria. We don't do that. If you ever see me have that type of conversation with you on campus, stop me. It's just not how we talk. And it's not how our society works. So it's important, I think, to actually listen to how people really do talk in real life, because it can help you as a writer set up very realistic dialogue. And if you'll notice in my example here, it really comes down to the descriptions. So not only what do you want, what I'm saying, it's how I'm describing her. She's turning to him, her face is tense. What do you want? And then he seems surprised. Don't you know who I am? I do. Her eyes narrowed, and you can tell by the way her eyes narrow, there's like an inflection there. I do, but I don't know why you're here. So just those little extra details in creating dialogue can help your audience envision what your characters look like, what their facial expressions are, what their tone is. Like, not just the words themselves that they're saying, but how they're saying it is incredibly important. All right, suspense holds the reader's attention through mystery and intrigue. We also talk in chapter 1 about point of view. Whose eyes are we looking at the world? On page 37, that's a nice way of describing point of view, through whose eyes. And there's 3 types of point of view. First person, where it's me or I doing things, is extremely popular. And the third person, which is he or she or they or Jane or John does things, that's extremely popular as well. The point of view that's not the most popular is second person, which is you doing things. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on when we get to point of view, the chapter itself. But second person is just, it's a little uneasy, it's a little unsettling, because you, the author, are telling your audience to do things throughout the text, and your audience may be uncomfortable with that. We'll talk more about that soon. Symbolism. Does things have meaning beyond themselves? This can be in names, mythology, colors. Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. There's a lot of symbolism there and a lot of connections back to Greek and Roman mythology. Intentionally, the author is doing that intentionally. Theme, what is the meaning of the story as a whole? Theme can be simple or it can be complex. It really depends on the story you're telling. I do like our book giving this definition of texture as a web of details. So the more details your story has, the richer it is. The more audiences can kind of pick it apart and get new things out of it. And then on this overview, they talk about two different terms: first impressions or running commentary. So I actually, in my spare time, do a few like movie or TV reviews on Tumblr, the wonderful world of Tumblr, and I do them different ways. Sometimes I will do a first impression, and sometimes I'll do a running commentary. So when I do a first impression, I will watch the whole episode of the TV show or the whole movie in its entirety, and then do a commentary on it. And that's first impressions. You just soak it all in and then write about it. The pros is that your response is very in the moment and fresh. You're not pausing the show or pausing the movie and then jotting down notes. You soak it all in and then give an honest first impression opinion. The downside of that is that your first impressions, you might forget something. You might forget what happened in the first 5 minutes of the film and not include it in your review. So that's where running commentary comes in. Running commentary is when you make notes and observations as you read the story or as you watch the show, and at the end you kind of compile them all together for your review. It's very helpful if you're trying to be thorough. The only downside is that sometimes it doesn't feel like a genuine reaction because you're constantly stopping and starting the story, and you can miss out on those initial gut reactions to something. But both of them can be very effective when writing reviews. Types of brainstorming, we talk about this in English 109, and probably you've talked about this in English 121. Brainstorming is talked about in our Cengage handbook. I know that says Wadsworth. It's an old slide. But your Cengage handbook talks a lot about brainstorming as well. So if you have trouble starting a story, or if you have trouble starting a paper, I would highly suggest looking not only at our Cengage handbook for their information about brainstorming, but also on page 53 in our textbook, Discovering Literature, there's a really nice section about brainstorming, and it goes over clustering and listing character portraits. It gives a lot of cool information and ideas if you have trouble with that sort of thing. And I highly recommend you looking at it if you need to. All right, so now that's the preview. That's the overview of all of our elements of short story, everything about the short story unit. Now, chapters 2, 3, and 4 are going to deal with setting, character, and plot. And I would argue that character, setting, and plot are probably the most integral, there we go, integral elements of a short story. Without setting, without characters, without plot, your story doesn't exist. So the other 4 elements you can kind of play around with, you can use them to one extent or more, but these you have to have. And so with setting, there are different types of setting that we have as options. The first is a mirror, and this is where the setting reflects the mood of the story. So for example, a desert could reflect a sense of isolation or hopelessness. Star Wars, that whole planet of Tatooine that Luke Skywalker is from, Tatooine is like a desert planet it's basically his symbol of hopelessness. He thinks that he's stuck there and is going to be isolated his whole life and is never going to go anywhere. And so it's a mirror of his mood throughout that story. And then when he gets off into space, all these opportunities open up. So it's very symbolic, the setting is. Mold is when setting shapes a character. So for example, Orange is the New Black. That show focuses on how the setting of a prison molds the characters and their actions. Escape is when setting takes us to an imaginary place. Alice in Wonderland is a great example of an escape setting, where she leaves Victorian England to go to this mystical, surreal, dreamlike world. And then finally, Alien. This setting does not mean that you have to be in outer space. Alien setting just represents a loss of home, or it represents the unknown. So it can be that you're in a new place. It can be that you're on a different continent. It can even be that you're in a different town. It's just somewhere unusual to you. Space just usually gets to be the cliche answer to that question, because we think space, we think aliens. Relating to dialogue, these two terms come up. One is stream of consciousness, and this is where a story goes from place to place very rapidly, sometimes without organization. Again, Alice in Wonderland is a good example of this, where it goes from one scene to the next without any real plot progression. Interior monologue we'll talk about in the drama section, but it's basically the story taking place inside the character's mind. So everything's happening in their head. It's not really a real life scenario. And page 60 in our textbook talks about this. Chapter 3 is character, and character is extremely important. I would argue that you can have a decent story with amazing characters, and that's going to be great, whereas a good story with weak characters can still be a little bit weak itself. Characters are extremely important. We have round and we have flat characters. Rounded characters are mainly your protagonist, your main characters. They're three-dimensional. They're complex. They have personality, motivation, depth. They're extremely relatable. They're people that almost seem real, that are made up by the author. Flat characters, on the other hand, are background. They're one note. They're very general. Think in Beauty and the Beast, Belle, Gaston, LeFou, Maurice, the Beast. They're all very rounded characters. They have personalities. They have motivations. You can understand why they do the things that they do. The villagers in Belle's town in the very beginning, the ones that are like, bonjour, 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 bonjour. Yeah, they're flat. They have one line in a song, and that's the most we see of them until Gaston has them in a little riot crowd going to the castle. That's it. They are flat. They are not very high dimension characters at all. Initiation is a rite of passage that takes a character from one point to the next in a story. I always think of Finding Nemo, where he's in the tank and the other fish make him do the little shark bait hoo-ha-ha. They do like the little ceremony to get him initiated. He has to go through the ring of fire. That would be a rite of passage, an initiation in that story. Persona. I like persona a lot as a term. This refers to a hidden personality. So usually a character that masks who they are throughout the story, for better or worse, is a character that has a persona. They're just putting on a front to hide something from the reader or the rest of the other characters. Oftentimes villains use personas. They seem like they're nice and they turn out to be bad, but that's not always the case. It could be that this really tough and gruff character that has like this hard exterior is really nice at the end of the day, and that rough exterior is just a persona, maybe a defense mechanism. Who knows? And finally, minimalism is where characters just have very simple traits that are just essential for the story. They're there. They got some traits. It's cool. That's all they need. I would argue in Lord of the Rings, Elrond, Liv Tyler. I've forgotten her character's name. I feel so bad. But her dad, Elrond, Hugo Weaving plays him, and he's very simple and brooding throughout the whole movie. He's just like, I'm the father figure, and I just don't approve of you, Aragorn, dating Arwen. Thank you. I don't approve of you dating my daughter, Arwen. He's a very minimalist character in Lord of the Rings. In the movies, now in the books, he's a bit more complex. All right, so chapter 4 is about plot. And there is, I'm going to put myself up here. So the first term that chapter 4 talks about is exposition. And this is a situation described as having the seeds of further development in that. And what that means is that an author will use exposition to give information important to the story to the audience. If something is new or alien or unfamiliar to what we are normally accustomed to, then exposition is used to give some kind of background info to all of us so we're not in the dark throughout the rest of the story. So my favorite example of this that is recent enough is actually this scene that I'm going to show you all. And so it is from Pirates of the Caribbean, the first one. And it to me, it is the perfect example of exposition. It's absolutely perfect. And I'll break it down, but I want to show you all this scene first and see if you can note why it would be a good example of exposition.
You, Sparrow. Aye? You were familiar with that ship, the Black Pearl?
I've heard of it.
Where does it make berth?
Where does it make birth? Have you not heard the story? Captain Barbosa and his crew of miscreants sail from the dreaded Isla de Muerta. It's an island that cannot be found except by those who already know where it is.
The ship's real enough. Therefore its anchorage must be a real place. Where is it?
Why ask me?
Because you're a pirate.
And you want to turn pirate yourself, is that it?
Never. They took Miss Swan.
Oh, so it is that you found a girl. I see. Well, if you're intending to brave all, hasten to her rescue and so win fair lady's heart, you'll have to do it alone, mate. I see no profit in it for me.
I can get you out of here.
How's that? The keys run off.
I help build these cells. These are half-pin barrel hinges. With the right leverage, the proper application of strength, the door will lift free.
What's your name?
Will Turner.
That would be short for William, I imagine. Good strong name. No doubt name for your father, eh?
Yes.
Well, Mr. Turner, I've changed my mind. If you spring me from this cell, I swear on pain of death, I shall take you to the Black Pearl and your bonny lass. Do we have an accord?
Agreed.
Agreed. Get me out.
Hurry! Someone will have heard that.
Not without my effect.
Okay. So this is perfect as far as exposition goes for a lot of reasons, and I will break it down with you all. First, if you've never watched Pirates of the Caribbean before, it is about Captain Jack Sparrow, who is after this cursed treasure. And he knows the lore behind it, he just needs help finding it. So he's stuck in this jail cell, and Will Turner, played by Orlando Bloom here, his girlfriend has basically been stolen, or kidnapped, so he's trying to get Jack Sparrow, Johnny Depp's character, to help him. So a lot happens in this one scene. Jack Sparrow explains what the curse is, the whole cursed ship, the Isla de Muerta, where the gold is, and explains how to get to it. So he explains all of that to us, the audience, and then we also establish that Will Turner needs Jack's help. Jack here says, oh, because you want to be a pirate, and Will establishes, no, I hate pirates, in that one line. He says, I need your help because of my girlfriend's been kidnapped. So it seems in this moment that we learn Will Turner's affections, that he doesn't like pirates. We know that Jack wants the treasure, how the treasure can be found. And then in this moment, Jack basically gets Will to let him out of the jail cell and also reveals to us, the audience, that Will's parentage is very important because, as you notice, Will says his name. Jack says, oh, named after your dad, right? And Will's like, yeah, and seems real suspicious of it. But we, the audience, get the connection that there's probably something important there about Will's dad that we don't know yet, but that Jack knows that we're going to find out later. And then at the very end, he lets them out, and we find out that Jack needs his gun, and we find out later on even more exposition about that. So, in a span of 2 minutes, we learn so much about this show, and about the plot, and about the characters and their motivations, and it's all done in 2 minutes in this really good moment of dialogue between these two characters. So, I just think it's great. I mean, you could probably find a really good example of exposition, but for me, this one works really perfect. Other terms from plot that we can go over, the protagonist and the antagonist. Now this will be on your exam for short story. Protagonist is the main character of the story, and antagonist is just the character trying to keep the protagonist from their goal. Notice, I did not say good character and bad character, because that's not always the case. Your protagonist can be bad, They can be a villain. They're just the main character. And so on your exam, you're going to have the option for who is protagonist and who is antagonist. The option of good guy and bad guy is going to be on that exam, but you will know not to pick that option. Instead, you're going to want to pick the main character and the person trying to obscure them from getting their goal. Right? External versus internal conflict. External are just the actions happening in the world around us in reality. Internal is happening in our characters' minds. Loose narrative versus tight narrative. A loose narrative doesn't have really a clear structure. It can kind of meander and kind of drift from thing to thing. Doesn't really have a big plot. I would say shows like Black Mirror or Alice in Wonderland, obviously, or even shows kind of like Curb Your Enthusiasm. Those kind of shows, they're not really, I mean, there's a plot, there's a point, but their structure doesn't really have. Seinfeld's a good example, too. Seinfeld is a very loose narrative. There's not a clear thread from episode to episode. They just kind of, things happen, and then the same characters go through different events each episode. A tight narrative, though, goes from event to event and has a very clear structure. So, shows like Game of Thrones, shows like, trying to think of some modern ones, shows and stories like Harry Potter, for example, they all have a cause and effect chain of events happening, and they don't really meander from that too much. Flashbacks, I think everybody in modern American society knows what a flashback is. It's just where we break the chronological sequence and we go back to show a character's past. We go to show something in the past that's happened to that character to give the audience more information. And then finally, I'm going to round out this with, on page 137, they talk about closure, climax, and resolution. I like this little picture here. It kind of shows the setup of a short story. You have your setup, you introduce your characters, the setting, what's going on, and then usually this inciting incident. This is something that happens that kind of drives the rest of the story. And the story kind of builds to what we call the climax, the highest point of the action. And then we have falling action to the resolution, which is the ending, and the closure where everything is wrapped up. Now, not all stories have a structure like this. Some of them, your resolution comes right here. Your climax to falling action is not very long. This right here kind of seems more representative to films like Return of the King, The Lord of the Rings, where there was like 3 endings, and this falling action seemed like it took forever. That's a good example of a structure like this. But this is basically your short story structure, or if you're trying to be typical, how you'd adhere to it. Alright, so that was our chapters 1 through 4. Like I said, we're only mainly going over terminology. So now I want to wrap up and just talk about what our assignments are for this week. And I won't keep you all too long. So go back to course content. Our week 2 discussion forum, if I click on it and show you all what it looks like. The week 2 discussion forum is where basically you're just going to pick a book, a TV show, or a movie, whichever you prefer, and I want you to explain what the 7 elements of short story are for that example. So this should be fun. This should be interesting. I'm excited to see what you pick. Oftentimes students pick their favorite story or book or movie or TV show, and can be very interesting, but I'm excited to see what you choose and how those 7 elements kind of, play out. My thing is, I want to know which of the 7 elements do you think is the most effective in your example and which is the least effective, and explain why. So I'm excited to see that. You're not going to have to explain all 7 elements, just which one you think is the best and which is the least. And then finally tell me why you chose that example for this post. So your posts are due by Friday. At least 2 responses are due by Sunday. And that is our discussion forum. The other 2 assignments are the reading response and the thesis statement for paper 1. I'll save paper 1 for last. Your reading response, as you can see here, is just reading our story Hills Like White Elephants on page 316 to 319 by Ernest Hemingway. I really like this story, and it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about next week when we're going over symbolism. So I'm excited to do that then, symbolism and point of view. So read that story. On page 319 to 320, you just answer questions 1 through 5 by typing out your answers. If this can be in a Word document or a Google Docs, whatever. And then you will you'll upload your file as either a rich text format, Word document, or PDF only. Do not submit in other formats. Those will not be accepted. So far, everybody that has done the grammar sampler has done it in the right format. So you should be fine as long as you keep doing what you're doing. But finally, let's round off with our Paper 1 thesis Dropbox. We're going to talk about Paper 1 last. So, this is just your thesis for Paper 1, what your story is going to be about, and then I'm going to show you the guidelines in a minute. You just upload your file, and that's pretty much it. So, Paper 1 is about short story. And I always when I was a student in English classes, I really hated it when the teacher only gave me like one prompt for a paper. They're like, you need to write about pandas. And I'd be like, I don't like pandas. So if you don't like something, your paper is going to suffer from it. So I try to give you all with each of our papers several options. And then you get to pick which option you think is going to work the best. So, for example, for this first paper, you have several options on prose. The first one is, if you like creative writing, you can write a short fiction story. I've actually had a lot of students do this. You can write a short, like mini short story, like the first chapter of a book if you're writing a book. I've had students write about crime noir, about people going on vacations, about, characters in outer space. I've had people write about some crazy dystopian stuff. You can do whatever you want. This is, if you want to be creative writing focused for this first paper, go for it. Flex your writing chops if you like that creative writing angle. If you don't want to create your own story, you can write about something that's happened to you or someone that you know. So it can be like a nonfiction personal narrative. You can do something like that if you like writing about your own personal experience. A memoir. If you like writing in a diary style format using the first person, you can do like a little memoir diary style event that's happened to you. Like if you went to camp for a week, you could do like a little diary entry for each day of the week and what happened. You could do something like that. A fan fiction, if you don't know what fan fiction is where you take something that already exists and you either change or expand upon it. So for example, I had a student one semester write about Harry Potter and what the first chapter of Harry Potter would have been like if it had been about Malfoy instead of Harry Potter. You could do that. My favorite fan fiction that I've ever read, though, has probably been, I had a student one time that did a crossover where the characters of Grey's Anatomy interacted with the characters from the Hangover movie series. So like Zach Galifianakis, Andy from The Office, and Bradley Cooper, like their characters interacting with Meredith Grey and the other ones, and it was taking place in Las Vegas. It was really funny. This author's note, just what she did, because I'm not familiar with Grey's Anatomy a lot, I know the characters but I don't know the story, is that she made a little like half-page author's note where she explained what the characters in Grey's Anatomy were like and how it related to the plot, and it was very easy to understand. But if you like fan fiction or you have ever wanted to try writing fan fiction, I would encourage you to do it as well. It's a lot of fun. And then finally, if creative writing is not your thing and you're like, I do not want to make up my own story, you can do just an analysis of a piece of prose. You can analyze a story either out of our book or one that you own or one that you want to borrow from the library, whatever. So you can just do an analysis of a current piece of short story or prose, and that will be fine. You do not have to do creative writing if you don't want to. You can do a very traditional paper if you desire. The main thing about formatting is that 3 to 5 pages, 3 to 5 full pages is our page length. 12-point font, no bold, no cursive, no large fonts. If you're using Arial, I'm gonna wag my finger. If you're using Arial bold, no. No big giant fonts, just standard fonts. 1-inch margins. If you open up a Word document, your 1-inch margins are already set. You shouldn't have to mess with these, but I have to put it in there because some people like to skirt around the system. And double spaced. They should incorporate the elements of short story that we've discussed in class and in our textbook. Grammar and spelling should adhere to a standard American English. You do not need a works cited for this paper. You only need a works cited page if you're using images or if you quote any form of text. Like if you chose the fan fiction option and you got your information about your characters from a website, you would need to cite that website. Otherwise, you don't need MLA this first paper. And then all components and drafts are due on time for full credit. And when you open up your file, you can see the due dates as they're listed here, and you can see my little instructions there as well if you have questions. And then how it's graded is that grammar and spelling are 20 points, page length and formatting is 10 points, and then your elements of fiction, nonfiction, short story are all each worth 10. So that'll equal 100 points total. So if there is no symbolism in your story, then that's going to be a minus 10 points. So you need to find some way to incorporate some symbolism either into your discussion or into the story itself. All right. And as always, if you have questions as you're thinking up your thesis for this week, if you have questions, you can always email me. Like if you're torn between two ideas and you're like, I can't decide, you can always email me to see if both of them will work or if there's one that might work better, in my opinion. But in the end, you're the one writing the story, so whatever is going to be best for you is fine with me. So that's basically it for this week. I do have an example paper that you can open up. This individual wrote this a few semesters ago. I love this paper. It's a short story that she made up, and it's very dystopian. It's very cool. It's very curt. It's just a really good short story that she made up, and I told her afterwards, I'm like, I'm going to use this because I really think it's different and interesting. So definitely give it a read if you get time, just to kind of see how she organized it. But otherwise, the only things due for this week are the reading response, your thesis for paper 1, and the discussion forum. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, feel free to call me, feel free to stop by my office, whatever works best for you. But I am excited for this week. I've read through most of your discussion forum posts from our introduction section. Really awesome class. I'm so excited for all of us to interact together this semester, to talk to each other. I'm just excited to see what we all come up with. That's the best part of this semester, is to see how we write and how we interact with one another. So if you have questions, let me know. But otherwise, I am excited to see what you're going to write about for paper 1. And I look forward to reading those thesis statements. In the meantime, have a great week, and I'll talk to you all soon.